Hello, my name's Ashley Raeside and this is my verbal justification for lesson 1. So the first element that I incorporated into my lesson was deep knowledge, and knowledge is deep when it concerns the central ideas or concepts of a topic and when knowledge is judged to be crucial to the topic. So I started off with some learning intentions so that it was really obvious what the concepts were going to be for this lesson. And what students would learn throughout this lesson. So deep knowledge is evident when either the teacher, so myself, or the students provide information, reasoning or arguments that address the centrality or complexity of a key concept or idea, or when the relatively complex relations are established to other central concepts. So the big difference between deep knowledge and deep understanding is that deep knowledge is about how I presented the content in the lesson, whereas the deep learning is how the learning occurs and is demonstrated by the student. So it is possible that I delivered deep knowledge, but students may not demonstrate deep knowledge, or the other way around, they could demonstrate deep knowledge, deep learning, but I haven't demonstrated deep knowledge. So some ways that I've incorporated deep knowledge is that I've identified the significant concepts in the curriculum by viewing the objectives, outcomes, content, and then developing learning intentions and success criteria statements. And the learning goals and success criteria clarifies my expectation, and it serves also as a guide for students for some self-assessment and self-reflection. And then I would connect these key concepts from this lesson to the next lesson and make sure that I finish up the lesson as going, okay, this is what we've learnt today, this is what we're going to learn in the next lesson. And then at the beginning of the next lesson, I would revisit what we've learnt in this first lesson and just make sure that we have no gaps and that students are aware of where we were at and where we're going and moving on to the next concepts. So as part of deep knowledge, I used authentic tools and resources so students could have access to a variety of different tools. And this was mainly digital because it was a pre-recorded lesson. But it also allows students to create a little bit. There's not a huge amount of creativity in this lesson just due to the fact that it was pre-recorded, but students still had a bit of ownership on how much information they wanted to do in some of the Google Forms and how much they could demonstrate. So by providing a variety of tools, offers student choice and also emphasises process over product. So this digital way of blending learning and flipped classroom offers a rich experience for students, and it's highly engaging and honours how they like to learn and create. Again, this particular lesson didn't particularly foster a lot of creativity. However, the students could choose how much depth they wanted to go into when they were discussing their prior knowledge and also their reflections at the end of the lesson. Some other ways to integrate deep knowledge into the class is making sure that less is really more, so less content, because it takes time to unfold the layers of a topic. I could have done this better. Because I felt that when I was developing the lesson, it didn't feel like it was a lot of content. But then as I was teaching it, it became clear that it was probably too much content for one lesson. And this was also provided to me in some feedback that this could have been split across some 2 lessons that may have been quite overwhelming for students. So this is something that I could do better in future lessons. At the beginning of the lesson, I provided an activity so that I could identify and then review students' prior knowledge, and then I will revisit that more as I move on to the next lessons and throughout the unit to make sure that I'm meeting the needs of the students. It also allows adolescents, who these students are, to start to make meaning of the content and start making links between the new concepts, what they already know, and then allow them to make sense and allow long-term memories to form. And we don't want them to compartmentalise the new information, and if it doesn't mean anything to them, their brain at this stage of adolescence will just let go of that information. So we need to make it relevant and allow them to experience meaningful deep learning so that then it becomes something that they can put into their long-term memory. The next element that I integrated was self-regulated learning, so for students self-regulation. So I used prior knowledge Google form, so what you already know about the nervous and endocrine immune systems, and then I also used a reflection at the end of the lesson. So self-regulation learning is more than just learning how to regulate emotions. It also taps into teaching and learning, that metacognitive aspect of learning, or learning how to learn. So it's knowing how to learn and being aware of how you like to learn and identifying own learning gaps. Barry Zimmerman did say that self-regulated learning is not a mental ability or an academic performance skill. Rather, it's a self-directive process by which learners transform their mental abilities into academic skills. So a student with highly developed self-regulation learning skills is aware of different strategies for learning, and they can select their best strategies for their context or the subject or the type of learning activity. They also have a growth mindset, and they have an accurate impression of their current skill level and capacities, and they take steps to bring about balance to their abilities, focusing on growth and development. And high student self-regulation is evident when we can continue through the lesson without too many interruptions, as we allow students to demonstrate some autonomy and initiative. A little bit hard to really do this in this type of lesson as it's pre-recorded, because there's no behaviour to deal with or anything like that. But having said that, the activities that were provided in this lesson allowed students to demonstrate and practice some self-regulated learning, because they needed to pause the lesson and work on the activities and keep to time. And this is done without me as the teacher supervising, so it's up to the students how they choose to, how much they choose to do to start with, and whether they keep to the time. The guidance of time is given to students to help them know what the appropriate amount of effort and time is needed for this activity. And throughout the lesson, I used some implicit direct instruction for self-regulated learning. And this was making suggestions for students to use a particular strategy or approach, such as spending that 5 minutes on the prior knowledge activity, or providing questions to prompt reflection at the end. So what system interests you the most, why, and try and get them to start focusing on their own reflection, but without actually explicitly saying, we're going to learn about self-regulation learning skills today. So I've designed my lesson with specific learning activities that will engage students in their self-regulation learning skills, such as this reflection. It helps them to assess their own progress and determine whether they're meeting the objectives of the lesson. But I didn't explicitly tell them that's what they were doing. So during adolescence, the brain starts to remodel itself, and this actually results initially in refinement and specialization and a decrease in synapses. But then when myelination occurs, these synapses that still exist in the existing neurons becomes faster. So this allows students to become more efficient in their learning and allows them to develop skills and knowledge in a more integrated way. So with some guidance from me as the teacher, students can start to regulate themselves and their learning, and they become more competent, well-developed adults who can contribute successfully to society. And these self-regulation skills are really important as they go through adolescence and into the adulthood, because they need to know how to do these things and know how they learn and what they can do to improve their own learning. The final element that I talked about was that I integrated was connectedness, and the things that I used here were that I used a couple of videos at the beginning, and also some pause and note help them to brainstorm ideas. So high connectedness is evident when learning has value and meaning beyond this lesson, beyond classroom, beyond school. So lessons that exhibit high connectedness will address a public problem or actual experiences or situations that students will confront. So for example, going for a run, why do we get hot? Why do we sweat? Why don't we fall over and boil from the inside out? And also using a video of a cat. Most people like funny cat videos, and we can all relate to when we're frightened and we get startled by a loud noise and we jump like that. So adolescents are at a unique stage of development, and they start to have a passion for things that interest them, and they've got more emotional processes and a greater emotional spark. So they have a natural drive to experience the world. So as the teacher, it's my responsibility to provide some activities that help them link to the real world, link to their real world, and link to things that they're already aware of. So as the lesson would continue on, this part wasn't recorded because it was past the 15 minutes, but at the end we talked about the immune system, and there was going to be some discussion about vaccines and immune memory. And so this content was made explicit, and the opportunity was given to students to explore the link between their context and significant concepts being investigated. So their connectedness was, about vaccines and about COVID-19, and this starts to link their learning about the immune system, about how vaccines work, to get them to start discussing some current issues, some issues like, we're getting a bit of vaccine fatigue, which is currently in the news at the moment. So we're trying to help them become involved in that discussion and start linking their knowledge to something that's real life and that they can have an opinion and a voice about. So in the future, I would also like to incorporate resources beyond the classroom, such as field experts, internet searches, local community people and resources, and also include some of that media information into the classroom. Because if adolescents' emotions and passions can be tapped into and they can develop their natural curiosity, they then start to develop critical thinking, they start to question and challenge the world around them, and they start to feel connected to their world, and they start to feel like a part of their community, and they have the ability to have an opinion and a voice. As they start seeing connections to their world, they also start to challenge their own thinking, and they start to challenge themselves and develop more passion and more emotional spark. So that's the end of the elements that I've integrated. You will also see that of my modules, of module 1, 2 and 3, and the things that I've added there, and the references that I've found here. So thank you for listening.